Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, it's been ages since we've talked about the case of O.J. Simpson on this channel. We used to do uploads periodically discussing some of the alternative theories on O.J. Simpson. And if you look through forums or threads and even the comments on YouTube, you'll find that there are a lot of people that are still heavily exploring the alternative theories associated with the O.J. Simpson case. In short, a lot of people either believe that O.J. Simpson is not guilty or that there is an enormous amount of evidence that has been overlooked. And for a long time, we talked about the Jason Simpson theory. I mean, I did a couple uploads on it because what I could honestly say about Jason Simpson, meaning O.J. Simpson's oldest son, Jason, could have committed the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. It actually comes to us from Detective William Deere, commonly known as Bill. Like, that was one of the sort of theories that maybe you would say that I genuinely believed, and that really comes along with William Deere's very strong storytelling presentations. But of course, they made the series that was produced by Martin Sheen, which attempted to debunk William Deere's theory, and I'd say it's somewhat convincing based on blood evidence. But there's a different kind of thing that we would like to discuss today. First, I would say that the motivation for this one was I began watching a video from an individual named Lionel Nation. That's, I guess, his YouTube channel name. Claims to be a former prosecutor who knew Johnny Cochran and did some work with him on court TV. And it turns out he has a series of videos on the OJ case. He said something very interesting when he's just like, if there was blood evidence in the white Bronco, that means that O.J. Simpson was guilty. If his glove was found at the crime scene, that means that he's guilty. And, like, especially people are also talking in the comments section, like, they found a mixture of blood in the Bronco that contained O.J.'s DNA, Nicole Brown Simpson's, and Ron Goldman's DNA. The only way that that blood could have been mixed together is if O.J. was indeed the murderer and he did this solo. Well, um, that's kind of the heart and soul of these alternative theories. I mean, most people would say, in the alternative sense, that O.J. Simpson, was the victim of false evidence, like the police planted the blood evidence in the Bronco. That sort of mixture of blood was kind of intentionally put together by police and smeared around in the Bronco. Once again, I used to entertain those things in the past, but some things have kind of dissuaded me from that, and OJ didn't help. In 1996, he did an interview when he said that the blood evidence could not be seen visibly in the Broncos. Like, you couldn't look into the car and see any blood at all, but obviously you could. As I mentioned in a previous upload, we didn't have the internet back then, and it wasn't very easily, like, you couldn't just get online and look at the photos yourself. And yes, you can very visibly see blood evidence both inside and outside the Bronco. There's at least one major drop of blood that is on the Bronco handle door. But the biggest alt theory that I think we need to discuss is something that is coming not to us from Lionel Nation, but from Robert Shapiro, the former, I guess you'd say, the first member of the Dream Team, the first person that OJ brought into the Dream Team of lawyers. And I was watching Robert Shapiro's interview with Megyn Kelly, and I know a lot of people don't like Megyn Kelly, but the interesting thing that Robert Shapiro said was one of the reasons why the prosecution failed in the O.J. Simpson case was that they were talking about one man and one knife. Robert Shapiro openly explained that he believes that there were multiple perpetrators and multiple knives being used. This is something that OJ has been talking about, well, for decades. In one of his interviews, I want to say it was one from 1998, he was insisting that, might have even been earlier than 98, but he was insisting that the attack had been done by multiple assailants. And also in the book, if I did it, here's how it happened, whatever that title was, I forget the exact wording. They talk also about an individual named Charlie, which is like a pseudonym or a moniker given to some unknown person. And, he's saying very clearly that somebody was there with him. It was actually this Charlie guy that was holding the knife, and that OJ grabbed the knife from him and then went after Nicole, and then Ron and Goldman, of course, came over. But the whole point is, the biggest thing that has been overlooked is not so much that Jason Lamar Simpson was at the crime scene. It's more that it was some other possible assailant. Somebody was with the crime at the crime scene that was not O.J. Simpson. And Robert Shapiro has also brought up something interesting when he says there were actually multiple knives involved. The absolute biggest thing, if you're going to entertain the O.J. Simpson case, is that Ron Goldman's hands. I mean, that was the thing that pulled me so far into the Jason Simpson murder theory. Ron Goldman's hands were completely torn up as if he had been striking somebody in combat. And to William Deere's credit, they did explain, like if somebody had been in that type of altercation with Ron Goldman, who was a black belt in karate, they would have been taking blows to the face and to the body. OJ was photographed up and down, like, I mean, obviously he had no major lacerations on his face, but I mean, if I recall, I believe we've seen photos of his entire body. He was photographed completely, like after he was initially arrested by the police. But a big thing is, we can see video of Jason Simpson. Like he first, there's the famous thing when he's running out to the car. He runs out to the white Bronco when it drives by OJ's house. And then also, I mean, like there's this little deposition or something. Originally, I thought it was a police interrogation, but in the comments section, somebody told me that that was a deposition that had been done at the request of lawyers. Like, a deposition. He doesn't appear to have any major lacerations to the face. And once again, O.J. Simpson talks about someone such as Charlie. Granted, I'm fully aware O.J. did not write the book If I Did It. That was ghostwritten by an individual named Pablo Flevges, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But if we're going to even start with some alternative theories, it's like multiple assailants, multiple knives. I think Robert Shapiro is onto something. Not to mention, though, you had somebody who was a witness who was not called to who was not called by the prosecution to the trial, who says that they saw O.J. in the white Bronco leaving Nicole Brown Simpson's home, and there were two people in the car. And they asked, they were given photos of Jason Simpson. They were asking, like, was this Jason Simpson? And they said yes. And they passed a lie detector test. I actually put a lot more stock into lie detectors than a lot of other people. I mean, some people might out there might be saying you just have to be calm to pass a lie detector test. Anyone can pass one. Well, I put a little more stock into something like that. I mean, I think lie detectors have actually become a little bit more sophisticated in the last 5 to 10 years than people are giving them credit. And I did a whole upload about that on this channel. But if you want to just put that aside, it really just seems like to me that there is a lot of evidence that this was done by multiple people. I do confess, though, it doesn't seem like they have like an enormous amount of blood evidence that it was found at the scene that would support that there was another individual there. And during the Judith Reagan interview, they actually said, like, who is this Charlie person that he's talking about? Their response was, they're just like, he's Charlie. He's talking about himself. Like, this is just kind of like OJ creating, a fictional character. And once again, that's the OJ didn't write that book. It's like OJ conducted a series of interviews with this guy Pablo, and he composed the narrative based on what he believed happened. So that's the kind of nutshell version about that. That definitely does not mean that OJ didn't have an accomplice. We're going to be talking about getting rid of the bloody clothes, the weapon. I mean, one of the theories that is about the bloody clothes is that they ended up in that garment bag that Robert Kardashian had got a hold of, and in the FX, the People versus O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story, that miniseries, they tried to kind of put that one to rest. They actually, showed A.C. Cowlings and Robert Kardashian opening the bag, and there are no bloody clothes in it. There is no bloody knife in it, but that's a fictional show. I mean, it's a fictional dramatization, and in the Lionel Nation one, he actually suggested the Lionel Nation video he suggested that the murder weapon was actually like disposed of in Chicago O'Hare Airport. I mean, I would find that a little bit hard to believe. It'd be so much easier to get rid of the weapon in a variety of other places. Uh, I mean, like, I'm not sure his exact reasoning for that. He has some other videos online about OJ, and I'm going to go through some of those, but I just thought it was quite bizarre to say that OJ would have gotten rid of the knife at O'Hare, Chicago O'Hare Airport, because he would have had so many other opportunities to get rid of it, like in, say, Los Angeles. Another interesting thing that was presented by Lionel Nation was the concept of O.J. Simpson would have had a much easier time getting off the hook as if he had just called the police and be like, hey, I went to my ex-wife's house and I found her murdered. Oh yeah, and there's some other guy here. He was also murdered. And then it was like, well, why are you covered in blood? Well, I picked her up. I was trying to see if she was still alive. Oh, I found this knife. They're like, oh, don't touch that. You'll get your contaminants into the crime scene. If he had done it that way, if he had called the police after this, but no matter what you say, OJ was found not guilty. I just thought it was very interesting because a lot of people look to things like, I mean, what I'm trying to say is this Lionel Nation guy is just not listening to any of the major alternative theories. The big ones are Robert Kardashian had a series of gambling debts or something of that nature, and that came back to OJ and Nicole. Nicole was at La Mezzaluna restaurant that night, and that was apparently a place where people went for drugs. One of the people who was commenting even made the statement that Ron Goldman had two friends that were killed in a very similar way, meaning that they're trying to say that this wasn't OJ, that this was a result of something associated with drug connections at La Mezzaluna. Is that really what happened? Well, I mean, we have OJ's glove, and they also have the Bruno Mali shoes that that was very definitively OJ's bloody footprint that was found at the scene. And yes, Lionel Nation gives a tutorial on how to pronounce Bruno Mali or something like that. I'm totally guilty of saying Bruno Magli in my early uploads. I'm not exactly up to date on my Italian or whatever language that is. I'm not up to date on many things, but it seems like very definitively OJ was at the trial, and the Bruno Mali shoes are one of the big reasons why he lost the civil trial. And then one of the other things was in the civil trial, OJ wasn't allowed to use the Fifth Amendment to kind of remain silent. He had to take the stand and he had to testify, which he didn't do during the criminal trial, and that was definitely helped to his advantage. He didn't testify as a defendant, and that probably is also one of the reasons why OJ didn't. That's one of the reasons why he was found not guilty. But a big thing that we want to explore, the absolute biggest alternative theory that we should say is OJ had an accomplice. I mean, this really could vary as, someone who could have been fighting Ron Goldman, or this could just be somebody who is serving as the getaway driver, someone who stashed the knife, someone who got rid of OJ's bloody clothes. I mean, Lionel Nation seems very, very convinced that it was not AC, it was not like Al Cowlings, like also that it was not Robert Kardashian. I even confess it seems somewhat unlikely that it was Jason Simpson. I have no idea who this would be, but I would say that OJ has dropped hints about it, if indeed that was his intention, whether it's talking about this Charlie individual or always saying that there were multiple attackers. But um, just hearing Bob Shapiro say that multiple attackers, multiple knives. I don't know, like it triggered something with me. Like it kind of connected a dot. I've been thinking of that for a very long time. That is one of the single largest pieces of information with the O.J. Simpson case that people just aren't examining. All the focus comes in on this one suspect, and according to Bob Shapiro, it's like the reason they lost the case is because they were just kind of creating this narrow picture that one man, one knife, and that's what happened. I mean, how do you explain Ron Goldman's hands being torn up from striking a person in combat and OJ having no real superficial wounds? Here's an idea. It could have been somebody else. And I don't necessarily know if the police extract DNA from somebody's beaten up knuckles or something like that. And DNA was in its infancy then. Barry Sheck, went through it and kind of really tore it apart anyway. But the thing is, I don't necessarily know if the wounds on Ron Goldman's hands would have come from the wound on O.J. Simpson's hands. Of course, he had a cut on his hand, and I've talked about that before on the channel, and somebody really called me out on it, saying that they provided this whole alternative theory about how OJ did not have the cut until he reached Chicago, and they have their reasons, but I can't really comment on that. What I can comment on is I just get the overwhelming feeling that there were two people involved. It would explain probably, definitely things about the disposal of the knife, the bloody clothes. It provides a lot of explanations. And that means that there's somebody who was involved in a double murder that was never charged, that was never never even thought about. I mean, I can't even name the person. Yes, I do admit that there is a possibility it could be Jason Simpson, but I don't have any evidence to support that. And what I would say is, as someone who kind of genuinely did entertain the Jason Simpson murder theory in the past, once again, they did a pretty good job going through some of the debunking things, really kind of like showing that a lot of the evidence that William Deere had presented in favor of Jason Simpson being the murderer was in fact misleading, or it's kind of held together with some fictitious connections, or at the very least, William Deere jumped to certain conclusions. Not to mention, like, I've been very critical of William Deere in the past because he did something where it's like he's reading out Jason Simpson's private journals, which he purchased from like a storage unit, like one of those storage things. Like, he's reading the private journals like in the documentary and puts it in the book. And I was like saying that unless he has a definitive line, tonight I murdered Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, unless he has something definitive like that, it was like that's kind of an unethical thing to do. I mean, like, when you're kind of just revealing someone's personal details that aren't necessarily relevant to the case. I mean, like, it's just a lot of it was kind of far out things that he tied in with what were most likely some fictitious things. But what I don't think is fictitious is that there was a second assailant, and that very possibly this was, the work of two people, not one, but the jury's only looking at one person. A big thing, though, that I would also want to be talking about is Lionel Nation says one thing that's kind of bizarre when he's like, was this a crime of passion? I mean, one of the theories is that OJ went there to slash Nicole's tires and she showed up and caught him, so they got into a physical altercation. Maybe, but I mean, this is definitely something that is very rage motivated. This is something that is also rather premeditated, if I understand, but it's like premeditated in the sense that they have the knives ready to go after Nicole Brown Simpson. I mean, that sounds like a little bit premeditated, and it's not just like a situation that got out of control. Obviously, they had some intent to do harm to her. I mean, OJ did say, though, in the Judith Regan interview that he frequently carried a knife in the car, referring to the Bronco, because it was difficult. There's some legal issues about moving guns across state lines. I don't have any details on that, but what I do have to insist is there's a consistent explanation that has been provided over the decades that there was a second assailant. As of now, I mean, we can explore some more of the alternative theories like drug connections at La Mezzaluna, the Columbia necktie. We can explore some things about Robert Kardashian and gambling debts. I mean, I don't necessarily know how credible those things would be, but what I can say is very high possibility that there is some other individual that was involved with the murders of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson that did not get charged. I mean, even if we're just talking about the getaway driver, or we're talking about somebody who could have very possibly been involved with stabbings, we don't necessarily know. I mean, like, I don't necessarily know. Somebody knows the truth. O.J. Simpson knows the truth, but that's all we can really say for now. Thank you for listening to kind of a revival of some things about the O.J. Simpson case. Once again, we used to talk about this one rather frequently on the channel, but it's been a while since we've talked about the alternative O.J. Simpson theories. And if you have anything to say at all about the case of O.J. Simpson, please drop a comment below. Do you believe that he was indeed the sole perpetrator, or what do you think about the theory that I've put forward associated with Bob Shapiro's comments that this was the work of two people who using two different blades? Not to mention any of the other alternative theories out there, Jason Lamar Simpson, or well as something associated with Robert Kardashian, or perhaps something associated with La Mezzaluna. If you have anything to say at all about the O.J. Simpson case, please drop a comment below.